You guys were just creating the Tower of Cards in the middle.
No,
that was
the
me.
Dice Tower.
The Dice Tower.
The Dice
Tower of
Tower.
Dice.
Dice Tower.
Yeah, there was a
Crash.
Yes. No, it's the one where...
Actually, if you
I
know
was
that episode, let me know because I can short.
But remember where I was doing the intro and you...
Yeah, that was funny.
There
That was funny.
was one where I literally started the first thing. Oh, I set the tone for the whole night. Alright, shall we get into this one? Alright, ladies and gentlemen, hello, welcome into episode 60 of the Board Game Gateway podcast. I'm your host, Neeber, for this episode, and I'm joined by three lovely gentlemen around the table. We start with our usual hosts in Mr. Damien and Mr. Ralph.
Hi.
And we have another special guest here with us, Mr. Leo.
G'day.
There we go. He's getting it. A little bit of a hesitation.
I think he's been shocked.
Yeah, it's fine.
I don't know about Leo, but I very rarely get called a lovely gentleman. So,
Well, that's
just,
well.
yeah.
Well, first for everything. No, we invited Leo on. We invited Leo onto the podcast because he was part of our Game Day B3GD Winter 2024, and we wanted to invite him and to have a chance to come onto the podcast with us today. This is the first time that you're listening to the Board Game Gateway podcast. We're your entryway into the world of board gaming, tabletop gaming, and fun times. And on today's episode, we're trying just a smidge of a little bit of a different format. We don't have a board game, a gateway game of the week, but we are going to be talking one game only and then a discussion topic. So our game that we're going to be talking about this week is the one you see here in front of us. This is Samurai by Reiner Knizia. And then we're going to be having a chat about nostalgia and we'll get to that discussion topic when we get there at the end of towards the end of the podcast. But Leo, first of all, welcome. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely.
Pleasure to be here.
Oh, well, great. It's a pleasure to have you here as well. And so, okay, let's not beat around the bush. Let's get straight into this game that we have in front of us here, because when we invited Leo here, Damien said specifically, I'm going to bring a game so we can all be mean to each other. And we thought, well, this is fun. We've got Leo who's coming. He's our special guest.
It's just funny because Leo is such a nice guy.
Yeah, 100%. So Leo here, and so
I enjoy having an excuse to, break out of my nice guy mold.
Yeah, fair enough. And you did come out of your shell during our gameplay, actually. That was good fun.
Yeah, so if you'd like to see our gameplay of it, we actually have a teach and a let's play of this game. It's going to be coming out very shortly after this podcast comes out. So keep an eye on our YouTube channel. Make sure you click the bell and subscribe button down below so you can be a part of that one. But Damien, let's get straight into Samurai by Reiner Knizia. Let's explain to everyone what this game is, and then we'll have a chat about our let's play and our impressions of the game.
Cool. Thank you, sir. Sorry. So, like Nee said, the game is called Samurai. It is designed by Reiner Knizia. Now, the version that we have here is the original version by publishing house Hans Ilm Gluck.
Bless you.
Thank you. That joke will never get old.
You should have said Gesundheit.
Sorry. I have to do it every time, though.
And it has been reprinted by, I think Fantasy Flight took a shot at reprinting this one time. Yeah.
Seems like a weird fit for Fantasy
It
Flight.
is, yeah. Like, there's been...
The game took about 5 hours when they printed it.
Basically, there's been a few different editions of Samurai. It is at the moment out of print. I'm going to say yes. I know I said I would stop talking about games that were out of print. This one, unfortunately.
And moving on to our discussion topic.
But essentially, what it is, it's a tile laying game. So you're in sort of like 12th century Japan, so feudal Japan, and you are placing your tiles. We all have the exact same number and the exact same type of tiles, but for each player color. And on our turn, we are playing at least one tile out on the board, with the goal of surrounding one of 3 different types of pieces. Now, unfortunately, all these pieces in this edition are small acrylic black pieces, and these aren't going to come up very well on camera. But essentially, you have Buddhas, high towers, and rice fields. And when you surround one of these pieces via land, so essentially you basically landlock the piece, anyone who has played the highest value tile for that particular type of piece wins the piece.
Cumulative tiles around that piece.
Yes. So if someone has played a 3 rice field and someone else has played a 2 rice field tile, and that surrounds that's all that's needed to surround a rice field, the person who's played the 3 value wins. Nice and easy. You do have tokens that are wild, so you have Ronin tokens, which are wild. You also have seafaring tokens. These are also wild, and they can be used against to increase your value against any type. You also have a couple sort of tokens that mess about with the board, so you can swap different types of tokens on the board, or you can actually swap your tile on the board with a different value. So basically shifting the balance of power on the board. Really great game. Plays in about 45 minutes, even with a teach. I think we got it done.
Yeah,
It was
that
quick.
was real quick.
So 4 players with a teach, we were done in about 45, 50 minutes. It's pretty straightforward. It can be mean. We had a few moments where we were blocking each other, and then we just turned the game on its head. And the game keeps playing until one of two situations happen. Either you have ties, so when you lock out a particular piece or you surround a particular piece, if there is a tie, the piece just goes off the board. No one wins it. And if there happens to be 4 ties throughout the game immediately ends. So it is a Reiner Knizia game. There is no everyone gets one more turn. No, the game just ends. Or if one particular type of piece is completely removed off the board. So in our case, all the high towers came off the board first, ended the game immediately. That's it. That is the game. The goal of the game is to gain majority in at least 2 pieces. I'm not going to go into detail on final scoring. I'm not going to lie. It is one of the weirdest scoring mechanics I've ever encountered in a game.
It's not too complicated, but it's
weird.
It has a lot of conditions. So the first condition is if you have the majority of 2 of the pieces on the board, you win. In which case, that's what happened with Leo. Leo won our gameplay, spoilers. But he had the majority rice cakes and the majority Buddhas. So he won the game. Now, let's say in the case that in our 4-player game or a 3-player game, everybody has the majority of at least one piece. So let's say if it was Damo, Ralph, and Leo, if Damo had the most rice cakes, rice fields, Ralph had the most Buddhas, and Leo had the most amount of high towers, they then each all have to remove those pieces from their scoring, and then they total up all the other pieces. And the person with the most amount of just total pieces at that point is the win. Now, that sounds a bit complicated, but at its core, what it does is it forces you to be a specialist, kinda. Like, you don't want to go only high towers, because then if you only have high towers, you have to remove all of those pieces, and then your score is 0. In our Let's Play, I had 0 pieces because I had 0 points because I had no majorities in either of the 3 things, so I would have got 0 points for that as well. So at its core, this game is, and Damo did kind of mention, the only other thing about it is he did say you can potentially play more than 1 tile. That's because there are 2 sorts of tiles. They have standard tiles and the tiles that have the kanji symbol on the bottom of it. And if you play one of those symbols, you are immediately allowed to take another turn. If you like, you're allowed to do it. And so that means what Leo did quite a few times was he had a couple of really good plays where he was like, I'm going to play a boat, and that guy immediately there and bang, I'm going to snap up that piece pretty quickly, and you can do that. Now, there are capital cities as well that have 2 symbols on them, which are generally pretty powerful, but those ones require at least minimum 4 tiles around it, whereas in some of the other islands, you only need 2. So yeah, that was the game. And I got to say, in classic Reiner Knizia fashion, this is stupid simple and stupid fun. It has no right to be as fun as you're just playing a hex on a thing around the board.
It was really good fun. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. It's a classic. I think what's cool as well is that the decisions get more and more critical. Like, there's a really nice ramp up. At the beginning, it's very open board. You can sort of go where you like and sort of build up a bit of a strategy. But as the time goes on, the decisions get more and more critical.
And in saying that they have to be more critical, this game literally became it's abstract in a way of that what you start seeing is it's kind of like a battlefield of influence around Japan. So like we had a game where at one point, Leo and I kind of went south, and we were just kind of, tussling over the islands in the border, whereas Ralph and Damo were in the north, basically going, we're going to figure this crap out and see who's going to get all these rights.
I just want to touch on that. That's actually kind of thematic to Japanese history as well, with like lots of little clans battling it out over there in the south, the north, and that's what it felt like during the game.
And let's not, like, I know in the last episode I commented that my heritage is Portuguese. Let's not talk about like Portuguese people, again, getting involved in Japan in 12th century, because that didn't go well. So
were they on the fast boats?
They had the fastest boats at the time. So.
Well, if you want to, I love this is a complete sidestep, but there's the Japan video by Bill Wirtz on YouTube. It's the guy who does.
Incredible.
It's a great video. If you, he does a good rundown. But yeah, look, I think Ralph, what did you think though? Because
so I made a few notes as you guys were talking.
I love that.
I thought that was really good.
Someone's going to be organised on this podcast.
I'm probably the organizer between me and me, really. But anyway,
I just
I did that tonight.
And bring the games.
Yeah. So I love the simple auction mechanic around the pieces. How you have to make a little circle around the piece, and then that's yours or potentially someone else's. It created that tension there. And to me, it wasn't so much the threat of someone being mean to you. It was more the threat of, is someone going to enclose this circle now or not? Do I spread myself elsewhere to see what happens later? Just opening up your options for the end game. Yeah. I loved how there was you had that 5 tiles, and that was what you could do that turn, is place 1 or 2 of those out. Because I wanted to do other things, but I just didn't have that tile. Yeah. And I love that in a game where it limits your options. And the thing I hated was the final scoring. That just threw me for a 6.
It is very obtuse, I will say.
Yeah, it is. It really is. But the game itself is beautiful. You can see exactly what's happening. You can see very easily who's winning the tussle right now. So I really enjoyed it. I felt that tension all the way through it. And placing one or two tiles out and you get your turns over, that's amazing.
And for anyone who's watching, this is literally the whole rulebook.
At youtube.com/@BG Gateway.
It's 4 A4 pages.
It's hold on. It's a cover page, 2 pages of rules, and then examples on the back.
Wow.
That's pretty good.
That's the whole rulebook.
Wow.
Yeah. So, look,
Fantasy Flight would not have.
No, they wouldn't.
30 page.
Yeah. So look, the game. Anyone who's listened to the podcast before knows how much of a fan I am of Reiner Knizia and his games. I have probably too many of his games.
I love the fact most Knizia games as well. It's like the game just ends at some point.
Yeah, it just
that
ends,
tension.
Yeah. Yes.
I actually don't like when a game goes and then everyone else gets one more turn, because then you're just thinking, what's going to maximize my points now?
Yeah.
Like it changes the puzzle.
And we had a state on the board where there were 2 rice fields, and I made a comment. I said, look, it looks like at this point rice fields are going to be what determines the end of the game. And there were Buddhas all over the place, and there were still a few high towers left. Leo swapped one of the rice fields for a Buddha. It then came back around to me. I placed a tile. Ralph placed a couple of tiles. Took out 2 high towers around that round. Mm-hmm. Leo took out another piece. The 2 Buddhas here then disappeared. Lee closed off another high tower, and that was the game ended. And it's like, oh, the high towers ended up doing it.
Yeah.
Because of that ramp. It's just all of a sudden the game just ended.
And this is why, so my strategy, I tried something a little bit different. So in the early game, these guys got into a few tussles around the center points, around a couple of center points in the board. Whereas I just said, let's see what happens if I just put my influence in different parts of the board, so that as we come into the later stages of the game, I've already got something there. And what I ended up finding was that didn't really work out too well, because the situation that Damien was describing there at the end, I had so the tiles come in, you get 3 of each of the symbols. So 3 high tower tiles, 3 rice fields, and 3 Buddhas. Not including the wilds, but just these 3. But then you only get 1 4, 1 3, and 1 2 of each of them. So playing out your 4 is a big indication of, okay, he's committed quite a lot to that particular instance. Now I saved my 4 of one of my big pieces, going, I wonder if I can get to that. And this was the 4 high tower. And unfortunately, I was like, I saw Ralph had some around one, and Damo had some around the other. And I had to take the risk because I had nothing else that I could play. So I'm like, well, I've got to put it there now. And then Damo went, sorry, mate, I've got another 2. And he pipped me on one, and then Ralph had the other. And I wouldn't have been able to pip Ralph because I didn't have any more high tower pieces in my hand. But it did come to a point
But
of
I didn't know that. So that was the tension.
You didn't know that. But this also comes to another point of 2 things. The first was, this game has, as you said, Leo, has this nice ramp of like the tension of your late game pieces, but also you don't want to leave it too late. You have to make a commitment at some point. Otherwise you can be forced into areas of, I lost a couple of pieces here in this southern island because I just didn't have my fast moving pieces to give me those things, whereas you did. Or in the very late game, you can have, I was just piped into a way that I just wasn't going to get any of these pieces. But the second thing that is really good, which we mentioned at the end of our Let's Play, and we want to mention again here, is it's all open information by the end of the game. We all have the same 20 tiles. You can see what tiles are out on the board, and you only ever hide 5 tiles behind your screen. So by the end of the game, we each had no more tiles to draw. So if we were really paying attention, you could look out there and go, okay, Leo's got
You've already
this,
fired
this,
your
and this.
fourth tower.
He's got this amount of wilds left. And, and that at its core is actually really good. It reminds me of, it reminds me of Caesar in 20 minutes, that kind of movement mechanic of you have a limited amount of actions behind your space. The question is, did he play that 4 high tower because he had no more high towers? But why did he play that now, even though he may have still had 3 more things behind his board? We don't know what they are. So I really enjoyed this one. This is a classic example of you can do so much with so little, which is it's just literally some tiles, a map out on the board, which is shaped like the islands of Japan. And let's be honest, like I was looking at it going, why did he do it that way? Why couldn't he? I'm like, well, duh, because he's making the islands of Japan.
Yeah, it's cool.
But it is super thematic, even to the way of like with your boats, for example, they've actually carved out specific coves for your boats to potentially be powerful amongst 2 or 3, like at least 2 cities. So
That's
like
right.
you've got these spots here, and
I wasted my boats.
Yeah.
but it gave a lot of like you said, it gives a lot of decision space with not a lot to do, and I love that because it doesn't feel overwhelming, but it means that you start looking for
Yeah, the game was pretty casual.
where am I going to go? Yeah.
For sure. I think one of the things that I did, for better or worse, is I didn't focus that much on the capital cities. I felt like they were a hotbed of activity.
Well, you
and
won the
people were-
game, so it must have been for
People
better.
were committing so many tiles to win those things, whereas I went
I'm
for
a
the
city boy, so
You're a city boy,
Yeah.
right, exactly. I must be the country boy, but yeah, like I just went for the cheaper, effective sort of wins where I could, and also nabbing. I feel like leaving that last tile open is dangerous because someone can quickly jump in with a fast one or a
true.
wild or something that can claim 1 or 2 pieces with it.
Yeah.
So you got to be really careful not to leave that one spot for
See,
someone.
my
to
strategy was like, okay, that piece is definitely mine. I'm going to let someone else do my dirty work and close that off for me. And then that obviously hindered me. But
Yeah. I really, it, as Damo says, it's pretty obvious that Reiner Knizia is one of our favorite designers here on the podcast. Mainly, I think, because he matches our kind of aesthetic in regards to what it is we kind of focus here on the podcast, which is games that are easy to learn. Like, we learnt this game in less than 10 minutes.
we had some good banter.
We had good banter, and we played the game in less than an hour.
Like, we're all serious about the game, but it was pretty chill.
But there were moments of this board game where we were like, ha ha ha, we're all laughing, and then all of a sudden we all went,
Definitely. That's
wait a minute.
Yeah.
And like, but again, because the game is all on the board, it forced us to actually know, like, it's very high interaction. Like, I can't mess with you, but where I go matters for everyone, because you're like, okay, now, like, all of a sudden, it's like Leo goes into the center of the board, and it's sort of like, all right, are we fighting over Kyoto now? Is
I
that what
love
we're doing?
how it started, like, the map was huge, and then it just got smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
I think it's also really important that a game you feel like you can reload and go again. And
Yeah,
this is
easier.
definitely one of those games you could easily just reload and go again.
And each one will be different as well because of that. Like, there's a nice balance of randomness, but you get those 5 tiles that you can choose from. And I didn't get my fast-moving ones until really late in the game, so that changes the way I play compared to someone else.
Exactly right. And also the other randomness in the game is the layout of the 3 different types of monuments. They randomly get put out.
Dano basically just said to us, start grabbing tiles and put them on cities.
Yeah, that was it. That was it.
I'm like, okay.
There was no structure to it.
With the fast boat tiles, I had 2 of them for maybe the first 20% of the game. And I realized I didn't have a good spot to put them, so I held on to them. And then I was like, no, I got to use them so I get my better tiles. Like, I got to cycle through them. And I just, obviously, it was a great first game.
Well, and that's the other thing as well, which is, this is an obvious thing, but when Damo said it, it's like, once a tile hits the table, it's not coming back. So once you play it, it's done, right? And then that kind of means, like, at one point, you could see Damo was like, I've got rice patties, but I don't want to play my rice patties right now because I know that it's bad, right? And he was just, But and again,
But there was a moment where Ralph used a rice paddy to block
Yeah,
something
I
and
did.
take a tile from
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
So you can use those
Because I already
strategically as well.
had rice paddies, and at the time I thought I secured 2 more somewhere else. So I was like, what do I need this high rice paddy thing for? So, yeah.
and look, I wonder if that would start to show itself in repeat plays, which is we were all kind of focused on our own game, but I wonder if in repeat plays we would start to focus more on each other's games and going,
Yeah.
no, I can be willing to throw the 4 on there because
Yes.
that'll force him to play either a wild or another high tower. in
You're
a position
definitely
he doesn't want
beneficial to go where someone else is and try and nab it from them, I think.
Yeah. I think this, as you said, this game does lend itself into a huge amounts of replayability.
Yeah,
And,
huge.
again, you could knock out 3 games in a game night easy.
I know it's called
Definitely.
Samurai, and the Samurai are wild tokens. So essentially, the 2 Samurais are 2 of any of the 3 other
The
symbols.
hired guns or swords of the Tokyo world,
Yeah,
the
so
Japanese world.
So I think that's pretty cool. They can come in and do your dirty work and fight for you.
Yeah. So anyway, the reason why we played Samurai tonight, and this is going to be our transition into our discussion topic for this evening, which is we have started to notice, and we're not the only ones to notice this trend, but we've all noticed in the past.
No, it's just us.
Just us?
Yeah, we're the first ones ever.
Just us, he says, as we actually are recording this on the night that, no pun intended, released their video.
No pun included.
No pun included. But released their video of Pampero, where they discussed this kind of exact kind of topic at the start of their video. But we've noticed the trend lately of a lot of these second edition reprints of older games. We're talking around the late 90s to 2000 to 2010s, the El Grandes, the Great Western Trails, those kind of games are starting to become a bit more sought after and in demand for reprints. And we started to ask the question, why? Is it a nostalgia factor? Is it a design, is there something that we're missing in today's age of overproduced plastic and stuff? And we want to have a discussion about this because I brought this up to the table because I've noticed, and I cheekily said, I thought there's there's BG and BGE. There's before Gloomhaven and before the Gloomhaven era. The Gloomhaven, GE and BGE. Gloomhaven era and the before Gloomhaven era,
It's
right?
just before and after Gloomhaven.
Yeah, I think before, to use anyway. But the point being is that there seemed to be this pivotal moment, and then Damo corrected me. He said
You know what's even more confusing about that is Gloomhaven has a second edition as well.
I know, right? But the idea of it being around the time of the Scythe, around when Scythe came out,
Which
we
is only
have now
6
this
years ago,
trend
so-
of huge, big box plastic production games, and we wanted to discuss. We keep coming back to games like Samurai and these older style of games, and we want to discuss. I'll open this question to you guys. Do you think we have a nostalgia for older games in the board gaming culture? If so, why or why not? Give your options, but also if why, what is some of the things you think? Are we missing things from board games, or is there some design philosophies that we've strayed away from? And not to say that we're not liking what we've got right at the moment, but there does seem to be. Look, I feel like we're stagnating a little bit when it comes to a lot of board gaming design.
So for this topic, I actually did a little bit of research. It's the first time ever.
What?
I never do research
What?
on these things. So started having a look on, and I will say, Board Game Geek is the only source of data I have. So take that with a grain of salt. But you kind of have a look at the dates of when games were released, and by older games and older games designs, obviously we don't just mean when a game was released, but it is an indicator on when things started to change. And you kind of see this sort of mid-90s, you start to see this sort of real increase where there's German designers coming out and they're releasing their games, and those games are getting translated to English. And that starts to happen more and more. And then you start seeing the French and the Portuguese designers coming in. And then you start to see the amalgamation of Ameritrash and Euro sort of coming together. So your El Grandes and such, and then eventually Chaos in the Old World and
Scythe, all those kind of things.
But even before that, you then come up to sort of 2010s into 2012s, and you have more designers coming in again, typically out of Germany, but you've got some really interesting people. You've got Stefan Fels now appearing on the scene. You've got the You got
Knizias are
you
there.
got, well, Knizia was already there, but then you've also got Matt
Lacerda.
Gertz coming into it and things like that.
Lacerda, all those kind of
Lacerda started to come into it at that point. But what I kind of realized is that it turns out that as more designers started to come in, more publishing companies came in as well. Those publishing companies, and this is purely my theory, those publishing companies have their own publish. So like we need to publish this many games per year. And what I believe started to happen.
Not just that, they also have their own guidelines as to what they will publish.
Exactly right. And in my opinion, this is why I believe older games were better, is that a lot of those older games, a lot of those designers would spend years just trying to get anyone to look at their designs. And what would often happen is that they'd be forever refining these designs, play testing whenever they can, manually cutting out pieces and such as things changed. Whereas when you have these larger publishing houses then come in and they have their own mandates, said, no, you have to get these designs out. I think things then start to get lost in that sort of like that push to just publish things. But this also then begins to coincide with the rise in 2014.
Quick Kickstarter.
No, something else. Tabletop Simulator comes out in 2014. Then we start to see more use of that. Then in 2017, we start to see Kickstarter, where Scythe comes out.
Was that only 2017?
2017.
Jeez,
Wow.
that's I know that's a long time ago in board gaming, like 7 years, but that's only 7 years ago,
And
right?
then in the same year, that's when Gloomhaven hits Kickstarter. Gloomhaven doesn't represent a change. Also, Gloomhaven itself doesn't represent a change in hobby, but Gloomhaven going retail represents dungeon crawlers coming, like en masse coming into the hobby.
I will slightly disagree with you in the sense of saying when you say Gloomhaven doesn't represent the change, it in itself doesn't represent the change, but it was the green flag of no, we can sell $300 plus plastic experiences and people will lap it up.
Gloomhaven wasn't plastic though.
No, I know it wasn't, but it was.
That's more like the zombie side.
Yeah, but it was one of those moments of like the dungeon crawler. Like I know it wasn't plastic, right? But it was these idea of that. It was one of the first, and what like Scythe also was this one as well. But Scythe was the first one that opened the door, and then Gloomhaven followed it straight through, and basically said, "Here's our Kickstarter model. You do this, we'll unlock, and we'll do all of this stuff." And then everyone went, "Fantastic, we can do this as well, and we'll follow suit." Not to say that Kickstarter.
I don't think Gloomhaven had like stretch goals.
It didn't.
But it was the cost of it at the time.
It was a
different format.
But the cost of it at the
complete
time was basically it saying people are okay playing. Oh, sorry, not playing. Paying that much for a board game, and then that opened the door for everyone to go.
There were games bigger than Gloomhaven.
Oh, I know.
More expensive than Gloomhaven, but were popular.
The point is that where that represented a change was, in my opinion, was then CMON comes in. CMON then starts doing these things.
I feel like CMON changed the game.
I agree. And I know we've spoken about this on a different episode, but that's kind of where we start to see a major shift in the hobby. Now, obviously, COVID has a massive part in that as well. People were buying more online or jumping into Kickstarters and things like that. But then we start seeing the rise of every game needs a game tray. Every game needs to have plastic in it. Every game needs to have how to play videos that come with it.
Double-sided player board.
Yeah, all these sort of things. And then while none of those things are necessarily bad, the issue I have is that those things almost become as important as the game itself. Whereas when we have a game like the one in front of us here today, now I appreciate these pieces are lovely in acrylic and you wouldn't get these sort of acrylic pieces anymore, but it's cardboard on cardboard for the most part. That's it.
I feel like we lost a bit of that purity from the early board game design, and in this desire to crank out more new, more polished, more this. I don't know. I have a lot of nostalgia for these kind of games. I think I came into the hobby at the time when these games were sort of really popular and we hadn't got to that new era yet. And I was going to add that I actually got recently another Knizia game that just got reprinted, which is Medici.
Nice.
You
guys have heard of that one?
Yeah.
And I was trying to think, like, why has this taken so long to get to reprint? And I don't know. I think it's, again, similar to this, right? It's the simplicity. There's something about it that feels like it's from a bygone era that maybe is not that appealing to publishers. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but it has that purity of design that makes it so simple to learn and teach and play.
I think this also starts to speak to, Damo brought up a really good point in regards to publishing houses. It's almost like the Marvelization of board games, if you will, like to use that kind of metaphor in the idea of the saying, like, okay, with Euro, let's just take Euro games and Thailand games as a brief example. The idea of like, well, there's only so many ways that these mechanics can potentially go together. So what are these games now currently doing? Like, if you will, a lot of games that have come out recently, there is rarely a 10 out of 10 hit. There's a lot of 7s and a lot of 8s. You know, if you will,
even then I wouldn't
even then, right? But there's a lot of like I always, or a lot of 5s, right? 5 out of 10, like just straight shot. Yeah, okay, this is pretty good. But there's not a lot of games that really, from a gameplay perspective, are doing anything that is super engaged. That's the wrong word. Not engaging.
Super different.
You're super different, and so the way that they're differentiating themselves is via
like a theme,
artwork. And what else are we going? You know, double-sided, double layer player boards, as you said, player trays, blah, 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 and those kind of additions. And I think I start to feel, but also, as you said, with publishing houses, especially one, let's say, for example, like let's use the big boy, Asmodee, right? Asmodee are now actually owned by, I believe, like a consortium of like investors. I believe they were bought out. Now they've bought out a few things, and now they've got profit goals that they need to hit. And that
do they own Board Game Arena, or is that them?
Yes, Asmodee bought Board Game Arena. Now that has been good for us because they are bringing a crap ton more board games to that are in their catalog because they realize more board games means more people want to come and play our subscription. But at the same point in time, they have investors that are looking for profit margins. In which case, well, then how are we making that? Is it through our Board Game Arena or is it through board game releases?
So I think that's also why we're seeing so many great board game apps as well that will help play alongside.
And this is why I don't want to like just basically poo on the parade of like new games are coming out.
No,
I think
there are a lot of good ones.
I think there are some good ones coming out, but the issue I have is that when I look back through sort of games that have come out sort of between let's say anywhere from the 70s even, all the way up until sort of 2012, 2013, there are so many hits there. It's just it's astounding how many games that are still relevant today that are still that I want to play. But beyond that, the drop off is real. And then when you have a look in the last 3 years, there's Ark Nova,
Earthborn Rangers,
Dune Imperium. No, even Earthborn Rangers doesn't.
Dune Imperium is a great game.
It's a great game.
Yeah. Are we just talking about rating? Are we talking about rating, or just
I'm talking about games that actually that have a presence on BGG, and you're right. Dune Imperium is a fantastic game. I'll happily play that game anytime, and it is a reflection of a game that is still well designed, and it did something really interesting, and it put aside. But this is the thing, Dune Imperium, no plastic, no game trays. It is indicative of an older game.
Yes, you're right.
It doesn't fit a neat commercial model of these days. Like this kind of game, it has no expansions, I assume. There's no, like the components are very simple, right? There's nothing to upsell. If you put this on a Kickstarter, what would be all the stretch goals?
Yeah, that's right.
I don't
think a Kickstarter needs stretch goals. Like, why are we in this society where we need
But that's what I'm saying. Like, that's the commercial model that we've got now.
And I think this also comes back to, we're no obviously professionals about this, but gameplay does not sell your game. Unfortunately for game designers, the way that a game, in my opinion, and let's be honest, if you're going through GameFound or Kickstarter, and the reason we bring these up, if you're not aware, which is that publishers and board game designers use these as essentially as two things. One, it gauges how many people actually want to play the game and is it worth printing. Or two, essentially the big boys, the Asmodees, the CMONs are using it as a pre-order service, essentially.
So I'll counter that because I'm a bit of I have a tight wallet. And I do partake in the GameFound and the Kickstarters, but very rarely. for me, the gameplay is what sells the game because I look up videos, I do a tabletop simulator run myself or something like that, and then I consider do I.
But are you in the
bypass?
minority of
I
I think
the
I
new
am.
shopper, the
I
new
think
board
I
game
am
shopper?
in the,
and I'm
because they're not cheap,
But
right?
here's-
Like you need to. Life's expensive and everything like that, so you need to make sure you're purchasing with a head.
I'm like you.
Yeah,
I look at gameplay more
Yes.
than I look at the
components won't sell
the
game to
components
me.
don't necessarily, like, for example, the big recent one that I bought on Kickstarter was Hegemony, right? That was $160, but there was no other game that I'd seen like it. It was a political,
Sure.
like a simulation of 4 different classes going head to head. And I will admit, the guys who've made Hegemony, their follow-up is called World Order, where that is going to be basically USA, one's playing as USA, one's playing as China, one's playing as Russia, and one's playing as the rest of the world. And it's a political game where there's tension, right? That to me goes, that sounds cool. I want to play that. But I think, and I'm fairly certain I'm in the minority here, because if I wasn't, games with an abhorrent amount of plastic miniatures, your Black Rose Wars,
Oh yeah, that's
the-
very absorbent. Yeah,
all of those ones.
It's fun.
it is fun. I really.
No, it's a fun game. It's a fun
It's
game.
not as simple as
It's
this.
a fun game. It doesn't need the plastic, and unfortunately,
It
for a
doesn't
lot.
need it. It's like, come
No,
on.
but that right there, that right there.
That's-
When
yeah,
you
that's
saying
why, yeah.
it doesn't need it, but
But
come
the
on.
game tray. Actually, you know what? It needs a game
And then-
tray. It's terrible. I'd rather the game tray than the plastic.
But that's what I mean. You're selling my point for me here, which is that in my opinion, the reason I feel like we're so nostalgic for these games, the Tigris and Euphrates of the world,
That's
the
a great game.
the
too.
Hansa
That reminds me of
Teutonicas, these games. Also, let's be honest, abstract games don't really come out as much because you can't sell an abstract game. But an abstract game is some of those, like the Hansas, the Tigris and Euphrates.
Even
These
Azul.
games are completely. How do you sell it?
Can I give you another
Yes,
example?
please.
There was one that I've always loved. I gifted it to someone and just so I could play it with
Yes,
them.
yeah.
Was Mad King Ludwig. I think
Yes,
it was
yeah,
Castle
okay.
of
Castle
Ludwig.
of
really
Ludwig,
wanna play
yeah.
it.
But the worst thing about that game is I mean, the gameplay is brilliant, right? But you open up the box and it's literally just cardboard, just stacks
Yeah,
of cardboard.
yeah.
There's no trays.
Reminds me
There's
of,
no
Castle
there's
of
no
the
minis.
Baby.
There's no wood. No meeples. Nothing. It's just a bunch of cards and cardboard.
Well,
But that was an example of
Yeah.
the purity of where you couldn't sell it that way
But-
today.
Yeah.
But back then, the gameplay was what mattered, and the rest of it, you're like, oh,
Yeah,
well,
right.
you know, whatever.
Yeah.
These
Yeah,
days,
agree.
I think they've done a new fancy edition of it with all the top. I think there was that one.
Yeah, there is.
that
Yeah,
they
so
did it.
we had that at one of so Stu, one of our volunteers, he brought it to the first game day. It's next level.
It's
Yeah.
bonkers.
It's massive.
Doesn't need it, but it's great.
It's great. It's
nice.
But it already had the first edition that was fine.
Yes.
But this is what I mean. So I guess the question that I have to you, gentlemen, which is something which I was thinking.
I-
Please.
Just hold on to that.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want to raise something here because I completely agree with what we're saying here. Is like all games, I love it. Just keep it minimal. Like it is pretty amazing to me. But the whole recently, like 2016, you said Scythe 2017.
2017.
so.
Right. So Scythe 2017, that sort of design got a little bit shuffled around, and in 2020 I think Dwellings of Eldervale came out, which is very similar in concept. Still a fantastic game. 4 years later, now the new hot piece is Andromeda's Edge, which is practically the exact same game as Dwellings, just rebranded with a space theme and just a couple of tiny little things, but it's essentially the same skin of a game. That happened between 2017 and now. We've had massive games. These games are not cheap games. These are close to $200, like, or more. How ridiculous is that?
Yeah, and the thing is, people will buy it. Like, it doesn't matter what the product is.
Yeah.
Products only exist and only continue to exist because people will buy the product.
Look, I'm not going to lie. If someone had it, I will play it.
Exactly. Right. But look, and,
Stoop to that level.
and
Yes.
it's really funny, and I appreciate that. No pun included. Used Pampero as an example. Because Pampero is the game that I got, and the moment I opened the box, I went, I will never play this game. Not because the game itself is daunting. Like, I have learned
44.
I've learned complex games. Okay, so I've got sort of
Right, you got Catan.
yeah, well, no Catan yet. Basically, I've learned complex games, multi-handed before, and had a blast. And then went, I can't play. I can't wait to get the guys around to actually teaching this game and stuff. Pampero, the sheer size of that box was so daunting. I went, I'm never taking this anywhere. Like I will never open up this box.
I do want to say, like, there are definitely some diamonds in the rough, like Voidfall, for example.
Voidfall, I will say that the thing that made Voidfall tolerable is because, one, someone had already punched it for me. I bought a new used copy, which makes a massive difference.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's saved years off your life.
Yeah, and two, Voidfall goes well out of its way to show you how to set up a scenario, and that's the other thing. It's a scenario-driven game. I'm not going to sit here and defend it and say that it doesn't have its flaws, because it absolutely does, and it definitely falls into the same trap of it's way overproduced. It could definitely be simpler, so on and so forth. But it is a game that is unique. There is no other game that I've played that is like Voidfall.
Well, and that's the thing, which is, I agree with you, Ralph, which is that I'm not saying that there aren't good board games, right? One of my favorite games, which we will get you guys playing, is Dead Reckoning, right? It's the pirate game that uses the card crafting mechanic that comes out, which is one of my favorite games. Love it. It was a Kickstarter big boy, and I saw it, and I'm like, yes, definitely need to buy that one, because I knew I was looking for a pirate game, and I thought this is the one, right? But I think the question which I want to ask you guys, which is, well, okay, if there are so many, and this is the other thing as well, which is that games need to stand out to get the traction that they want, because you have a lot more independent publishers trying to find that audience. So that's why a lot of people have to stand out with one way, whether or not that be art. Pampera is a good example, because I will admit, when I saw the box, I went, oh, this looks like a really simple, really easy kind of. It's like, nope, this game is a, almost Lacerda-esque, like, big energy sells big thing, right? And I'm like, okay, well, I wouldn't have known that. But I guess the question becomes, like, when we look at a game like Samurai, what is the thing that we are kind of yearning for? Because I've got an answer that I think I know, like what it is about these games that I really find nostalgic.
Let's start with initial impressions thing.
Okay.
You look at this box, and it looks like an old VHS tape.
100% it does.
3 times over.
Yep.
What sort of game do you think about when you see this?
See, I have no idea, right? And this is the thing, which is that this takes you back to a time period of, like, well, I know that whatever we're about to play is going to be some kind of Japanese samurai thing. That's all I know about this game.
Yeah, I have no clue what this is.
I
know.
know.
And I would say the size of the box as well
Annoys the hell out of me.
It's completely early 1990s.
Overproduced.
No, it's not overproduced. It's the classic 1990s Monopoly box size.
Yeah,
like that's what it is. It's the rectangle, and that's what it is, right? It's basically there was a period of manufacturing in the early when Monopoly first came out, all the way up until the 2000s, and this is one of the reasons why we didn't have a lot of board games, especially international, and why German things were so huge. But two things was, one, it was just there were a lot of board game designers, and that was a big thing about what they have in the European countries. Shipping those board games in those countries was just a lot easier than shipping them internationally. But the reason that boxes were all that size was basically because there was very few manufacturing houses, and they all had the same sort of thing. It was cheaper for them just to use the same sort of box dimensions.
Template,
use the same box dimensions. For me, the thing that I think is the most nostalgic is twofold. It is for me, it's one, the loss of abstractness, quote unquote, if you will, because the idea of, like, we play games such as a Samurai here in front of us. I mentioned Hansa before. Tigris and Euphrates are another one. Like, I'm big into chess, for example. I really enjoy playing chess. I suck at it, but I really enjoy it. But the idea that there's a lot less imagination on the game board than there used to be. And by that I mean in the sense of, when we were talking about Samurai, to me, when I was playing this game, it felt like we were just playing tiles. But my mind was going, I am imagining this as a struggle of influence between, we're calling in mercenaries, I want to be the guy who owns that, blah, blah, blah. In a game such as, for example, Brass Birmingham, or things which I love, those games are economic. I need to find the most efficient way through this puzzle, and I'm going to then come out the other end being the most efficient thing. And I think that's the reason why I also really fell in love with Hegemony, because Hegemony allowed me to use my imagination to go, I am playing the capitalist class right now. My goal is I am wearing a suit. I'm playing cards to make money. My investors need to keep me happy, blah, blah, blah. Away we go. For me, this is the biggest thing that I think a lot of people are nostalgic for. El Grande is another big one, right? At its core, what are you doing? You have an auction followed by taking a power card and then placing dudes on the map vying for influence, right? But the idea is the abstract, the theme behind there is that, well, we have the king who's walking around the lands, and we're trying to, influence the land without the king noticing, because I'm not allowed to place anything around him. And all of a sudden the game starts to feel small and tight. And I think that's the second thing, which is these games really give you a very, very limited framework of you have minimal actions.
Yep.
But what you can do with those actions seems to expand the scope of what you, but it's all there. And to me, those are the two things I feel like people are searching for. And it's one of the reasons why I think it's one of the reasons why I think Dune Imperium is actually so super popular, which is there's actually not a super huge scope of what that game is, but it is super tight in what it tries to do, and that's why I think so many people are.
Just to double down on that, I think one of the criticisms I've heard some people use for Dune Imperium is the combat just feels like moving cubes around on a board. But I think that harkens, which it is, right? But it harkens back to this style of abstract gameplay in a way, where you do use your imagination more, and that purity of that mechanic actually I really enjoy, and the way that combat works.
I do too, because the theme behind Dune, it's like it's a harsh planet. It's like even though you won the combat, everyone dies.
Yes, I love that. I love that you have to say to people, no, you got to wipe those cubes off the board. They're dead.
The thing about the battling in Dune, just to diverge slightly, it's more about playing those intrigue cards and saying, okay, well, do you have any intrigue cards that you'd like to commit to the battle? And you sit there going, oh, maybe. And then there's that little bit of bluffing that comes into it. I agree with pretty much everything you just said there. I will say there are modern games that do have that, and I know.
I don't want to say it's gone,
but few and far between.
I
will say that the biggest thing that I find about particularly older designs is, again, the simplicity allows for table talk. The simplicity allows for interaction. Even games that aren't high interaction games, like Brass, they still have interaction. Whereas I find more and more modern, particularly modern Euro games, there is so little interaction.
Interaction doesn't have to be, I'm getting in your way.
No, I agree. But it still requires that there has to be some sort of contact. There has to be some sort of communication across the table. And I'm going to say, look, it's my personal preference. I prefer games where there is communication across the table, where there is interaction. I typically don't like games where you just stare down at your board and do your own thing.
That's why he likes Root so much. Because everyone has to look at the board and go, dude, get in his way. What are you doing?
And I'll be the one pointing it out. It's like, you need to go fix that there.
I think you tried to do that
in this game. Yeah. It didn't work. I tried.
No, I didn't listen.
I mean, look, it's the same. Like the last game of Brass that the three of us played together.
You did entrap me into that.
I said, there you go, you can take my beer now. And he's going, oh yeah, I can, and took it. And I ended up
should not have done that.
So, that's, and again, this sort of interaction is more prevalent in older games, whether it be more direct, so let's say in combat, slightly less direct, so like here where we're just moving pieces around, or even direct in an abstract way, whether it be like a dexterity game or something like that. I just feel like a lot of that is missing in more modern games because it has been replaced by. It needs to have a solo variant. It needs to have game trays. It needs to be made of plastic. It needs to do this. Oh, you might take up painting one day, or we're gonna have more plastic then. And
it needs to have a board with 5,000 different.
You want screen printed wood? That's going to cost you a little bit extra. You want
you want UV spots on your box? Absolutely. There you go. You've unlocked that stretch goal. There you go. And it's all that stuff. And yes, look, this box annoys the hell out of me. I'll be honest with you. It's going to be harder to find this copy. This is the older one. The FFG one is floating around. You can find it, and it actually is a reasonably sized box.
I'm not mad about the box.
I'm mad about the box. But
I've got a question for you guys. Are we looking at the past with goggles on? you know how like some people say the 80s had the best music and things like that, but you're like, okay, for the 2-3 great albums that came out of the 80s that you're remembering, there were a million ones that sucked. Like, is it that there's too many publishers and there's too many options for people that don't get picked up by a publisher that it gets so saturated? Like, what are we thinking? Are we looking at the past with just looking at the best stuff?
I don't know. I think there's gold to be found in the past,
definitely.
across everything, not just board games, music,
Yeah.
movies, whatever, right? So maybe it's just that we've been around long enough that we remember some of that gold, and we want to see that not be lost in the mist of time and overtaken by the big shiny things.
Are we running into Netflix syndrome, which is we now have a burden of choice, which is, let's be honest, back, say, 25 years ago, around the 2000s, the amount of games that could be published, as you brought up at the start of your demo, were few and far between. So the ones that had to be published, the ones that they were sure that they probably could be that would sell a lot. The Ticket to Rides, the Carcassones, the Settlers of Catan, those sorts of games that were easy to play, easy to pick, easy to get going, and then they sold a lot of copies. Why? Because everyone could play them. I potentially think we're also running it, as I said. So the Netflix syndrome is, we now have so many people who have got board game designs. I mean, just take this, we remember at PlayCon, for example, we had 16 designers or something like that, 10 to 15 designers there showing off different games, doing all that stuff. Not every game can be good. Every game can start, but not it. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Not every game can be the number one rated game on Board Game Geek. You're going to get a lot of mediocrity, and that's not to say that those games aren't good. Like, there are some games that I would say are super.
But a lot of it, it's not their goal to be in the top 100 or anything.
Is that the problem? Because we now, like, if you're not making a game to be the best possible version of that game that it possibly can be, are we just coming out with a whole bunch of games? And this is why we're running into, we play games and go, that was okay. Move on to the next one. That was okay.
Well, I think that was really good because we had a chat with Keith from Cutlass Games.
Yes.
And he's, it's called Cutlass Games because his latest game is Cutlass, which is a trading card game. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a pirate-themed 1v1 battler. Yeah. So almost like in the kind of idea of Res Arcana, like little limited decks. And
he started that company with that goal in mind, but he wanted to make that game really good and like be known for that game. But the thing is, you can't just create that game as your first game. So he had to publish a different game, had some success and learnt the business, and then he published another game, and now he's like, I'm going to focus on my goal now.
100%. And I'm not trying to say that people, I'm very well aware that people need to just publish games. They need to work on a game and potentially they need to get it out there because not everything can be perfect. But we are now getting the burden of choice, which is, there are all these games out here. I have limited time and I have limited money. So what do I choose to spend my time on? And the thing that I feel that is, as we said,
we should definitely, as gamers, be rewarded for going back to a golden game of the past. Like, it shouldn't be a top 100 games now. It should be like more definitive.
We do that. We've done that quite a lot lately. Ra is now having
that's the other big example I was thinking of.
Ra is a game that came out at about the same time as this. It's been reprinted by I don't know how many different publishers now. Now 25th Century Games have printed it. Look, yes, there's like a tiny expansion, but the truth is, it's a reprint. It's a reprint of yet the game that they've reprinted. They've deluxeified the whole thing. And yes, I know, contrary to some of the things I've said already, I own the deluxe version of that game. I didn't back it on Kickstarter. I was able to buy the deluxe version for basically the same price as the regular
standard version.
The standard version. So I grabbed it. I'll be perfectly honest with you. It brings a smile to my face playing with that deluxe version.
Well, of course, ridiculous. If you're driving a Lexus, you're going to enjoy it.
Sorry. but the thing is, though, the nuts and bolts of what Ra is and the game that I've played for years is exactly the same, and it is not lost. It is an auction game that you can teach to people in 10 minutes. You can have it played in an hour.
And it's another great game of emergent gameplay as well.
Brilliant.
And this is something I want to point out, Ralph, to come back to your thing, which is the rose tinted glasses. I just want to say I agree with Damo here, which is I love the deluxeified content that we get. It is super nice to have those player boards. But it's almost like, oh man, I'm full of analogies tonight. But it's almost like as if the games that we are nostalgic for are the Toyotas of the world. Reliable, can get super replayability out of it. And it just feels like a lot of games that are coming out now are, if you will, like a freaking Jeep, Land Cruiser or Land Rover or something, a Range Rover or something at the moment. That they look pretty, have got all the bells and whistles, but probably will break down on you in the first 50,000.
You picked a bad analogy. Range Rovers don't break down.
No,
I was gonna say, like, I know a few.
Not those ones. But that whole idea, right? And that's I'm more thinking about. Actually, no. I'm thinking about Merc G-Wagons.
If you want to think of a car that will break down, call it an
G-Wagon.
Alpha. No, an Alpha.
An Alpha. There you go. All right. Sorry, Top Gear just
You got to
finished.
source the car from Europe. You're never gonna get it.
Anyway, but that's what I thought about it, and I feel like we're coming into an age of where people are starting to get not a little bit over, but I feel like people are starting to realize Kickstarters are slowing down in the sense of that people are not just throwing money at everything, because the amount of things that are hitting the shelf, delays in Kickstarter, are the whole other thing. But yeah.
How about you, Lee? Have you backed many Kickstarters?
I'm not much of a Kickstarter. I was earlier on, and then I just felt like I need more faster gratification.
We all went through that phase. I think we've all gone through that.
I went through browsing the website,
backing, and then waiting. Just like, nah, this is too long, too risky. I don't know.
Definitely.
But I was actually going to say, I think there's some parallels maybe with music in some ways. To your point about rose-colored glasses, maybe we've moved on generationally, but there's still gold in the past that we can pick up and replay whenever, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay. I think that we've got new generations coming through. Maybe they want to see different kinds of board games. The difference with music is all that old music is still available at our fingertips, right?
Yeah,
you go back and listen to the old classics, and they get resurfaced through popular culture in different ways.
Definitely.
Whereas board games, if they're not reprinted, how do we capture them? I mean, maybe now with digital, things like Board Game Arena, there's more opportunities for older games to be easy to find. But
even with Board Game Arena, I played Tigers and Euphrates in person, absolutely loved it. Thought it was amazing. Played on Board Game Arena, I'm like, what am I doing? I'd rather it on the table.
You want it on the table.
The tactility,
the
I think the
difference.
tactility of games cannot be undersold of how, and that's part of the reason why plastic minis, also because people like to paint minis, but also because it's really cool to pick up a big piece of plastic and go, my monster, rah, and just chuck it on the board.
But
Right?
the problem is that in a lot of those games, you touch that mini twice.
Yeah.
And you set up the board and we tear it all down. That's it. You never touch it again.
Yeah. Anyway,
I don't know.
please, let's wrap it up and start getting this one.
I would say the Kickstarters that I have backed in the past have been of varying levels of quality. So I think there is something to be said about going through the publishing gauntlet and having really solid gameplay at the core. Not dissing all Kickstarters. I think, again, to use the music analogy, right? You want to have the opportunity for anybody to surface their game, to publish their game and get it out there.
Definitely.
But at the end of the day, it's survival of the fittest. Quality has to win out. For me, quality is the gameplay at the core.
Well, we just recently touched on Leviathan Wilds the other week, and we backed it, and it's literally just cards and cardboard, right? There's no fancy plastic in there.
And then wooden meeples. Yeah. And the only bit of plastic is the reaction token. and the dice, So there's a reaction marker.
Right, and that could have easily been cardboard anyway. But
and then there's dice.
Fact is, we backed it just based off the gameplay alone. Yeah, really, awesome. That's all we were after.
Yeah, that's it. And again, that game is a reflection on a game doing something different, and that's why we backed it. Or that's why I backed it anyway, because the game was enjoyable and it was different.
That was me with Dead Reckoning. The way how do battles resolve? Take some cubes, drop them in this ship, and wherever they land, that's the results that you get. And I went,
that's cool.
That's so cool.
It's still one of my favorite things. I love it.
And also, how cool is Galaxy Trucker just in general? Just the scavenging, man, that's another old design.
So much
too.
of that stuff.
Look, there's a lot of great simple old designs that are amazing.
Yes.
Look, this is something that we could talk about all evening and all afternoon. And I think it's safe to say that at its core, we're not saying that there isn't good board games out there. In fact, there is a lot of good board games out there.
New board games.
Yes, new board games. But there is a lot to be found if you're willing to go. And this is why Facebook Marketplace is great. You can find them. There are especially Sydney in Australia, we have got such a healthy secondhand market scene going on at the moment.
We've got collector cons and even just random garage sales. You'll find some gold.
Absolutely. So look, Damo he finds a lot of he'll be just trolling for Facebook Marketplace and see a deal and it's like, bang, yep, I'm grabbing it. Because even
$20.
Yeah, absolutely right. I saw Barrage for $50 the other day and I'm like,
wow.
Honestly, I'm like, oh.
Wow.
Should have got it.
So
I
like,
should've.
I went to CanCon, right? They had a massive secondhand store option. I would have walked right past Samurai and not know it was a fantastic game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's worth doing your research on these
That's
things.
why you walk through it with me.
Yeah,
I
I do.
tell you, go get that.
Yes.
Go get that.
Anyway, so
And
we're going to
generally,
start.
you're buying them.
We are going to start to wrap this one up soon. So that's the end of our discussion topic. But before we get to the end, I believe that Ralph had something
I
that he would
do.
like to ask Leah.
So, Leo, we invited you on. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
I suppose we kind of started this podcast as well to spread our love of board gaming, right? And we all have young families, and we want to spread this into more family groups and really sort of encourage people to have that game night as opposed to have that TV night or every now and then sort of thing.
Yep.
So we try and feature a lot of board games that are family related as well. And I know you've got young kids as well. How old are your kids?
Yes, I've got a son aged 8 and a daughter about to turn 11.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Damien's got 4 all over the place.
Yeah.
Been very productive.
And then,
Yeah.
Productive.
and Nia and I both have just started our family journey with young kids as well.
Yeah.
So I've seen your Facebook stories as well every now and then, and I saw that you play Concordia with your daughter,
Yes.
and I think that's incredible.
Yeah.
11 years old playing Concordia with you.
Well, my son was playing as well, so he's
Wow.
8. So there you go.
That's amazing. So how did you bridge that gap from playing games like King of Tokyo or
King Domino, Carcassonne.
things like that? How did you do
Yeah.
that to start becoming actual like adult board games?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably something to be said about genetics. I'm sure that they've got some of my nerdiness to them. But no, it was just sort of gradually getting them introduced to, gateway games and family-oriented games and just, not being forceful about it. But, when we have time as a family, just come together and be like, hey, do you want to play a game? Happy to teach it. And, if they're happy to, then we'll do it. And there's no pressure around it. And just bit by bit, that, and I asked them today, I said, what was the game that sort of unlocked? Because it felt like there was almost an inflection point where, they played casually for a while, but then there's something where they went, oh, this is really great. So for example, my son has always played a lot of casual games on and off, but not that long ago, I took him on a weekend with some mates where we just played board games the whole weekend. And he absolutely loved it. And he got into Dune Imperium at the time and a bunch of other games. So, which, is probably a little bit more than I was expecting him to get into. But early on, I would say that the kinds of things we played, King Domino was definitely one of them. So it's a great little game, just dominoes that, with different terrain types. And you sort of, your turns are very simple. You pick a tile from, I think it was like 3.
4,
and
3 or 4.
3 or 4, and then you lay it to build up your kingdom, essentially. And then all the scoring happens, I think, at the end, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And it's very, very simple to teach and easy and fun to play, and they love that. But the earliest one I can remember is probably Sleeping Queens. I think Gamewright has some amazing, really young
We haven't seen that one before.
games.
I've played Sleeping Queens. I think Abandoned Artichokes when we played from there.
It's an oldie. It was the unique story there was that it was designed by a young girl along with her family. So she came up with this idea. Her family helped her basically design the game, and then Gamewright published it.
I didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
So if you have the game, it's one of the cards in the game that explains the backstory, which is quite cute. And the kids loved it, right? So it's basically a tableau. It's a set collection game, a tableau of hidden queens with different points. And the kids have to do a bit of maths to sort of play a set of cards to be able to turn over a queen and claim it.
That sounds
You
really
have to
cool.
build up a number of points. So again, simple stuff, but they just enjoyed that. So little things like that. Saboteur was another one that my son absolutely loves, and I
that's really good.
hate it with a passion.
I like
But that's the other thing about playing with kids is you have to sort of put aside what you like or don't like, and if they love something, just play it with them.
Yeah.
Don't
I think the same
Don't
goes
worry
for
if
everything. Anything your kid's into, you got to try.
just
and
do it.
Yeah.
Just suck it up and play it.
I will say that the thing that I've noticed, so my daughter is 7, 7.5 now, and we totally forget it, but I'm watching my kids learn the language of board game mechanics. And so we understand games now because we've played enough games that we can go, all right, there's a mechanic here. I can see how this is all starting to interact, and I can start to see the cogs turning. Whereas kids, you literally get to watch them put the cogs in place. Like King Domino, for example. It's like, yes, it's domino, it's tile laying, but with a very simple auction mechanic. You can take the powerful piece, but you're going to go last.
Yep.
Or like next turn, you don't get that, you're going to go last next turn. And I watched that moment, my daughter at 7 or 6 went,
It clicks,
but I want to go first, but I want that piece. Well, you're going to make the choice. And she literally went, but I want both. And I went, you can't have both. You've got to make the choice. And like that whole idea of like, that seems like such a simple interaction, but that is the stepping stone of like, well, now you understand that generally, if I take the powerful thing, I'm taking a compromise of next turn, and that's what you have to think about.
That's really cool. I've played Clank with some adults that aren't typically from a board game upbringing or anything like that, so they haven't had that sort of exposure. And just the fact of like, oh, you buy a card, they were fine with the mechanics, but just the mechanic of you buy a card now, oh, do I get to do the thing? No, it goes to your discard pile. That had to be explained pretty much every time they bought a card. And I felt like your kidney and so on, they wouldn't need that encouragement in a way, because they would sort of understand that because they had that exposure from that young age.
Absolutely right. So, well, that's super cool. That's super cool to know that, you know, that they're getting into those games. So what are their favorite games at the moment? I mean, he mentioned Concordia, but what are their favorite games? What are we big into at the moment?
Oh, what are we big into? I mean, my son has enjoyed Dune Imperium, but that's more of a heavy one. What would they be into at the moment?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one to get an 8-year-old involved in.
Like, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's the sci-fi theme.
Yeah.
It's the like the mix of combat and engine building and all this
Yeah,
stuff.
I like it. Like, you're not selling it to me. Like,
No, I
it's
know,
fine.
but there is a simplicity to it that's really nice as well.
Yeah, okay, cool.
He loves Star Wars deck building game.
Love that.
That's a brilliant one. Again, that's another thing I would say about, you know, family games where there's a really strong thematic element that helps ease, or raise that appeal to the kids as well. So I know he loves Star Wars, so of course I was going to get that. And there's some great quality time because it's 1v1.
Yeah.
And the theme is perfectly done. And for my daughter, she loves a lot of stuff. She loves probably Azul, Alhambra, you know, more of the abstract or the simple mechanic games. So we definitely play a lot of that stuff. And they're ones that I probably get a little bit sick of, but I'm just like, yep, cool, we'll play that if that's what you want to play.
Well, I think this, as we just said, this is not the sacrifice that you make, but you do like, it's the same thing of like, these are not my favorite games. But the fact that you want to play the game right now is I will play that game with you.
And to be honest, like sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't really want to play this. And by the end of it, I'm like, actually, that was all right.
Yeah, sure.
You know, at least it resurfaces something that I might not have otherwise have brought to the table. So.
And look, I'm personally like playing against you guys. I wouldn't do a move that will throw a game, but against a kid, like to encourage them along, like I'll definitely do something that's like just to help them along a bit and keep them coming back and keep them.
That's it. Just
more,
encouraging,
you know?
and also the strategic thinking. I think it's really important as well to encourage that. Replay that decision. What could you have done differently?
Yes.
I also find it like
promotes discussion.
Board games are the perfect vessel for teaching them humbleness and victory, and also
in defeat.
In defeat as well. Same thing. It's like my I had to teach my daughter. She's like, oh, I'm like, no. Like at the end of the game, we always shake hands and we say good game.
Yep.
And even if you're not happy about it, you need to congratulate. It's okay to be upset that you didn't win, but we don't. I actually saw a quote on TikTok very random. This lady was saying, you can be upset without being mean. And I think that's the same thing. It's with board games. It's like you can be upset about that, but you need to show some grace in defeat. And you say you congratulate someone because then. And I also had to teach her same thing. It's like when you win, you can have your little dance, but you can't. Don't
rub it in.
Don't rub it in. Yeah. You can have your little dance, but also at the same point in time, don't be a brat about it. So
that's it.
Fantastic. Well, all right. So before we wrap up, the one final thing, Leo. Now we mentioned at the start, which is you were part of our game day.
Yep.
And you brought a pop-up shop to our game day. So we wanted to give you a chance for the viewers to give a big shout out to. Well, I'll let you explain it and. Let's go from there. Hey?
So what do you do, Leo?
Sounds good. So,
what do you do?
Aside from my boring day job, I do have an online shop for tabletop games, which is The Game Shelf. So you can find us on www.thegameshelf.com.au. And I started it last year. I'm a bit crazy with things and a little bit impulsive. I'm like, you know what? I feel like I want to do something, give something back in a way. I know that sounds weird because it's retail and it's commercial, but just as we were talking about how important board games have been for my family, I just want to help spread that love and that joy of board games a little bit more, especially in this area, like where we live in Southwest Sydney, such a burgeoning area with families. And I've already met through the kids' school friends, have parents, and chatting to a few and they're like, oh yeah, board games, that's cool. And then sort of slowly get them into the hobby. So I love to see that, more people, more families getting into the hobby. So anyway, opened up a board game shop. The inventory, like the range of stock is pretty, small at the moment as we build it up. But the idea is to start with just proven quality gameplay games, particularly those that, families and people can play mostly casually. There's a few heavier ones in there as well, but the idea is just to have a really high quality selection there for folks to be able to easily find something that they can bring to the family or bring to a board game night.
Yes.
So that's the shop, the game shelf. I'm wearing the shirt. Google it or find us online. And hopefully one day there might be a proper physical shop somewhere in this area. But in the meantime, we'll do the online thing.
That's quite exciting.
Yeah. So make sure you do go and check out his board game shop, www.thegameshelf.com.
.au.
Don't forget .au.
Australia only.
Australia only, yeah. But we were so happy to have you as part of our game day, and even more super excited to have you on this evening. We thought you were the perfect person to ask about the pop-up shop because you matched kind of the same energy we were after with that game day. So it was great to see that we had a lot of people who were all like, oh my god, you guys have got a pop-up shop. I'm like, yes, we do.
Yeah,
Please go and see Leo.
Yeah.
We and you were stocking a lot of the games we were showing off on the game library, which was a big deal.
It was an absolutely fantastic day. Everyone had a great time. I had the kids there as well. They played with people they'd never.
They were there so much later than I expected them to be. They were there late into the night.
Absolutely surprised me. Like I said, you don't have to stay. It's up to you. But they stayed till right to the end.
Yeah, they were there.
And it was just a testament to how well the game day was run. So congrats to you guys.
Yeah, definitely towards the later evening because I was pulled aside from Blood on the Clock Tower a lot. I remember your daughter and your son came up with like a stack of like 4 or 5 games. Like, can we borrow all these at once? I'm like, yeah, you can.
They were patiently waiting for me to finish that game of Tigris and Euphrates so that they could then play a bunch of games that they've been looking at all day.
That's awesome.
So
Nice.
it was good. It was good fun.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to bring us to the end of this episode of the Board Game Gateway podcast. We'd like to thank you very much for tuning in. If you like what you listen to, please make sure you click the subscribe and like button down below. And we are on your podcasting app of choice: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, no longer Google Podcasts, RIP. Google
I miss Google Podcasts.
But anyway, if you enjoyed what you said, please make sure you do all of that. Share us out to a friend. Leave us a comment down below. Is there a game that you are nostalgic for that you want to see come back?
A game you want to see.
You want to see a game that you think deserves a second reprint? Leave that down in the comment section down below. Or if you're listening on Spotify, you can actually now answer that question on the actual Spotify app. So make sure you do that as well. Until next time, though, thank you very much for joining. I was Neeber. That was Damien. That was Ralph, and our special guest Leo. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.